you everyone for joining us tonight for our July virtual town hall. In a moment, I will turn over the event to David Orr to introduce tonight's panelists, SEIU Local 1 President Tom Balanoff and Andy Fox, the Director of the Chicago Office of Labor Standards. First, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. We are live streaming on Facebook right now, so if you're joining by Zoom and don't want to be shown on the Facebook broadcast, you can turn off your camera. To do that, you can just click on the stop video icon at the bottom right of your, or bottom left of your screen. Your microphones are muted to prevent background noise. If you have a question for our panel and you didn't get a chance to submit your question in the registration process, you can go ahead and enter it into the chat, and we are going to try to get to as many questions as we can with the time we have. Finally, events like these are only possible with your support. Please visit goodgovernmentillinois.com and chip in so that we can keep holding our virtual town halls, and hopefully soon we'll have some in-person events as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Good Government Illinois founder, David Orr. David.
Thank you, Morgan. Morgan Harris, by the way. Welcome, everybody. We're going to get right to it because we've got two very interesting people we want to hear from. I'm going to give you brief intros to both Tom and Andy, and then we'll get right to the questions. Okay, first of all, Tom Balanoff. Tom is the president of SEIU Local 1 and also of SEIU Illinois State Council. They represent about 50,000 property service workers in roughly 6 states, about 6 states and 11 cities in the Midwest area. Tom was elected president of SEIU Local 1 way back in 2000. Again, a beautiful resume. He's done a lot of things. He's been a national leader, for example, on various issues, particularly the Fight for 15, which is helping actually millions of people across the country now. Specifically, he won a good contract for Detroit janitors, $15 an hour wage recently. At the international level, he negotiated a very good contract with something called ISS, which happens to be the largest cleaning company in the world. And there's much more, but let's just say that Tom Balanoff comes from a very famous family, a labor family with labor leaders, politicians, and judges, all of them activists to the core. And now for Andy, Andrew Fox, go by Andy. Andy is the executive director of what we call the Office of Labor Standards for the city of Chicago. He'll tell us more about that, but he has about 20 years of organizing work relating to labor issues, important labor issues, and criminal justice, both at the state and local level, including, for example, the state he was manager and chief administrative law judge at the Board of Review, which was the Department of Employment Security. So besides serving in these several other state offices, he teaches in the criminal justice program at Roosevelt University. He's been an English as a second language teacher, using the Spanish very well, both in Pilsen and other places in the Chicago public schools. He got his law degree at Kent College of Law. He lives in Pilsen. And finally, he's a bicyclist, meaning he goes more than 10,000 miles a year. And all I can say, Andy, is ouch. But welcome, both of you. Thank you very much for being here. Let's start right in with the questions. Let me start with you, Tom. You know, you've been a labor leader, and by the way, I have friends that want to thank you for contributing to the strike fund for the recent strike by SEIU. But you've been a leader in this area for many years. What are one of the 2 biggest challenges or campaigns that you see or either involved in or you can tell us about to try and help working people in this country?
At this point in time, you mean, David?
Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you, David, for inviting me to be part of the town hall tonight. It's a I'm happy to be here with Andy. You're right, I have been a labor leader for a long time. I would say the biggest challenge facing labor right now is how do we start to build density, rebuild the labor movement. When I started in labor, it was almost 30% of the private sector was unionized. And quite frankly, it was the industrial economy drove things. There was centralized national bargaining. The labor movement impacted both the economy as well as obviously the political arena. Today, there's probably about 7% private sector workers unionized. There's very little centralized bargaining. And quite frankly, we've seen the effect of that over the last 40 years that the vast majority of workers' wages and value has been flat. So I would say having laws that are relevant to today's economy are necessary. The PRO Act is an issue that the labor movement is pushing. We'll see how far that goes. But I think that's one of the most important challenges facing labor right now. You know, and David, I think a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is that we've seen as labor has declined and collective bargaining has become less of a standard for all workers, union and non-union. You see that we've had much more activity around trying to regulate workforce and create standards, both at a national and local level, with some success. And I'm sure that'll be a big part of our discussion today. So again, thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you. Okay, let's switch over for a moment. We'll probably come back to some of the, maybe the federal things too. But Andy, I know it's a complicated issue, but you've got this office, you know, Office of Labor Standards in the city of Chicago. Tell us a little bit about it, and as short as possible, tell us what are the key issues that you're working on.
Well, thank you, David, for having me. Tom, it's great to be here. It's like being at a table with the legend. I was trying to recall my days back when I was early in government, and David Orr was, I don't know, that was so long ago, I can't remember. Just kidding.
He was mayor at one time.
Right, that's what we were talking about today. He was mayor at one
Hey,
point.
Tom, who's older, huh?
You're right, brother.
So recently I was at an event, and it was kind of the rolling over of the minimum wage so that new tiers of employees will get an increased minimum wage July 1st. And the mayor said, Andy, when we hired you, your job was like this big. And since you've been here, it's grown. So like, I'd like to recognize Reverend CJ Hawking. When I first started, one of the things I did was I got a memo from those at Arise to kind of help create, help create the Office of Labor Standards. And I said, well, I want to meet them. So I went over to Arise, just right by Ashland and Lake. And we met, and I was just trying to appreciate everything that was under the jurisdiction of the office. And at that time, it was minimum wage and paid sick leave. And it was smaller than it was now. You know, wage theft is really under minimum wage, but wage theft, we just passed a new wage theft section to really escalate and focus in on wage theft. But it's another important step. Meanwhile, I was at meetings and these really long tables with advocates and kind of the coalition of people that had fought for the Office of Labor Standards. They were negotiating minimum wage. They were talking about paid sick leave enhancements. And then they said, oh yeah, there's this other law. It's called the Fair Work Week Ordinance, Andy. And it passed. It's a little more complex, so just take it easy. You're gonna have to write rules on it. I'm like, okay. So, you know, the amount of work that it took early on to understand all the players, appreciate everything that had happened was really good. And luckily where I'm at, it was a very supportive department. Not all departments, not all bosses were supportive. They gave me all the tools. I also got this toolkit written by Janice Fine, kind of on how to set up an Office of Labor Standards. And me and another policy wonk really just took a blank slate and said, let's look at other cities and states that do this. Let's look at kind of the formation of the office and the empowering statutes, and let's do something that matters. Because, you know, a lot of times in government, this is the way we've always done it. It's not the way to do it. So we kind of rewrote the office from scratch based on best practices and models. And since then, we've added wage theft, we've added paid sick leave enhancements, we put in amendments to the minimum wage and paid sick leave ordinance. And I've got a lot of other things on my top of mind going forward, but that's just kind of an overview of where I'm at right now.
Well, let's drill down for a second on wage theft that I think Chicago estimates. I've heard figures up to 400 million. Now, for a lot of people, some of our listeners, what in the world is wage theft? But when you say people are being robbed of $400 million, that's pretty significant. Tell us a little bit about wage theft and how you combat it. And pardon me,
since I've been there,
I have to ask that one first because my wife wrote the book on wage theft. So
I've heard, and I've done a little research on it. Your wife, that is. And what I see in the area of wage theft is, you know, wage theft is any time they basically don't pay you what's due, but the permutations of it and how it pervades are very subtle. It means you work 40 hours and for some reason they clocked you in at 30 hours. When you leave a job, they charge you a fee or they don't pay you the full amount. You're like, well, whatever, I'm just going to take what they give me, and you don't have any recourse. So some people do it as a business practice. They don't pay you on time, they pay you less, they steal your tips, they don't pay you the full minimum wage. Each year when the minimum wage increases, they forget to pay you, and you're like, whatever, I'm just happy to have a job. Maybe you have paperwork, maybe you don't. Maybe it's in the, the cash economy is out there. And one of the areas where we don't reach is 1099 independent contractors. We only reach them in the area of domestic workers. So we can reach domestic workers regardless if they file a W-2, 1099. We have challenges reaching undocumented people unless we can find that they're full W-2 filing, kind of employee style employees. But the independent contractors, the municipal code of Chicago does not reach them in ways that we see classification does. So think of, big ticket items, Uber, Lyft, Instacart, all these app-based developers driving Ferraris and islands right now, and they're in Ibiza, wherever that is, and other foreign countries on the backs of workers. So when Tom said the economy has changed, work has changed. And so when you say, what is wage theft? I think of all the different ways that people make money off the backs of workers, and workers are not in the position of power to get what's theirs. And that's kind of what labor's for, is to collectively to approach management and get action. And the Office of Labor Standards is supposed to represent them in the context of wage theft.
So, and so part of it, they exploit immigrants in many ways. That's why I think we've got some worker-centered people that I think both of you work with in the Chicago area. But I think wage theft often is exploiting workers, sometimes language, they don't get pay stubs. And when you say independent contractors, explain to people, if an employer does that, how else does that hurt us? Like, they're not paying payroll taxes, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, so if you drive a car for Uber or Lyft, or if you deliver groceries and you're an independent contractor, you're not getting paid sick leave. So if you don't have health insurance, where do you get health insurance? You get it from an emergency room, or you don't get it. If you don't get paid sick leave, then you might go to work because you don't have an option. So you go to work sick, and in a pandemic, you go to work sick and it spreads the virus. Independent contractors and this whole idea that drivers have the convenience of working when they want. Meanwhile, and there's a big one, Handy. If you think of domestic work as an area, Handy is an app where people were working in homes based on an app, but they're independent contractors, yet Handy is using GPS location of the workers and governing the conditions of their employment. So, one way is to get people to the Illinois Department of Labor. If we can't reach them in the city, get them to Illinois Department of Labor for classification. But Seattle has classification. Not that I'm advocating for more work, but like some cities, progressive like we claim to be, are doing classification at the municipal level. And that would really reach more workers.
Okay, let me bring you, Tom, back on this. Phyllis Mitson asked a question about the impact of the pandemic on workers. And she was focusing particularly on older ones and disabled. But let's bring you in on the impact of the pandemic on the workforce kind of in general. And I don't know if it connects in this question, but I wonder how you work with the worker centers who are basically working with the unorganized.
How SEIU works, we work very well with the worker centers.
Because I don't think
my good friend CJ Hawkins is on the panel today, or on the call today.
But since we don't have CJ on tonight, and of course, she'd be very good. But tell us a little about worker centers, because I have a feeling many of our listeners and watchers don't really know what they're doing here.
You want me to tell you? Well, listen, worker centers evolved really, I think, as the labor movement started to decrease. And you have workers organically, will rise up and be, get, as Andy said, get angry enough to say this is enough. And I think worker centers here in Chicago and throughout the country have filled a void. Oftentimes they're more centered on immigrant workers, not always, but on immigrant workers who are the most exploited. And oftentimes they understand they're being exploited, but because of their status, there's very little they feel they can do. So I do think worker centers have filled a big void, and it's really reflective of the fact that I think at the end of the day, oftentimes workers understand the most power they can have is if they can figure out how to function collectively. And I think that's a void that worker centers have filled, is in addition to a lot of other things they do, services to working people. And it does reflect, I mean, it was very interesting. I mean, wage theft, you can go, the more vulnerable workers are, the more they'll steal from them. So undocumented immigrant workers, refugees, workers who don't have access to a lot of social services, they're stealing from them all the time. And it's, I think it is, Andy, I think it's probably some companies, it's much more their model in terms of how they make their profits, understanding that they're going to routinely steal wages and oftentimes not get caught. Work an hour off the clock, you got to get it done, this, that, and everything. It's a problem. And I think that a point you made, Andy, was right in terms of we have standards, and I think I'm glad your office, I'm glad your work has gotten a lot greater, Andy, because that means that we're developing more standards, which are really arising out of the strength of the issues. Like the minimum wage, that's probably the strongest income inequity. People understand that, but there's not sufficient, this model in the long run, there's not capacity to enforce these laws. There's not, if workers aren't informed, if they don't know where to go, they don't know how to access, they don't know. So the laws are great, but there needs to be a vehicle to enforce it, which we would argue that's the advantage of having a union contract, because you have an enforcement mechanism right there. The workers have a process in which to use their collective strength to bargain a contract where they can remedy these problems. But it's 6% of the private sector workforce organized now. That we got a lot of work to do to figure out enforcement.
Okay. How about, Tom, the impact, either general or specific, the impact of the pandemic?
The pandemic is, well, particularly in our industry, we're primarily private sector, primarily contract cleaning and contract security, housed in commercial real estate. Well, right now of 16, 17 months, occupancy downtown is about 20%. So you can see that it's had a huge impact. Fortunately, a lot of our members, we got to protections under layoffs. A lot of workers have gotten displaced. It's fascinating what's happened with the money that's come in to help get people through this process. We got a very strong labor market right now in terms of valuing workers. And, I'm very worried, David, that we're going to see another big surge. I think it's already happening, which is going to set us all back. But assuming that doesn't happen, I think that that your overall economy, we can see that it's growing pretty rapidly. There's going to be sectors that are suffering. For example, I don't know I hope a year from now, 50% of occupancy is in commercial buildings, right? But fortunately, with the aid that was able to be brought at the federal level, overall workers have come through this better than I thought when it first started. And I think that's important. And I actually think, David, this is a time for probably another panel, but I think a lot of workers have gotten experience with UBI. What's happened, they understand it. It's makes sense to them. It's actually given workers, at least it appears, given them much more flexibility. People aren't going back to their jobs. I mean, we'll see where that all pans out, but pandemic has certainly impacted our lives in a whole lot of ways, and we'll feel that impact for a lot of years to come, no doubt about it.
I can't help but think every time I hear people complain that we can't find workers for this job or that, and I think of people getting some decent unemployment, some benefits. I just think it's wonderful, frankly. I think
David, there's an easy solution for business to attract labor. Pay people more.
Pay them more, right. Well, that leads us, thank you, Tom, that leads us right to another crucial issue. We're celebrating the increase in the minimum wage, July 1st here in the city. And before I come back to you, Tom, Andy, tell us the specifics. I know Tom spent a lot of time working on this. Tell us the specifics, who this applies to in Chicago, how many workers. The 15 doesn't go to everybody. So tell us the details, please.
So currently the city uses kind of a tiered approach. If you have 21 or more covered employees, you get $15 an hour effective July 1st. If you have from 4 to 20, right now they're at $14 an hour, and that in each year it changes. So, and if there are less than 4, which would be 0 to 3, then they default to the state minimum wage. What we see, and after that, so next year, the people at 14 will go to 14.50, and they're on a ramp to 15. Next year, for those that are 15, as the county found out, unfortunately, it's kind of an either or. If the consumer price index and the rate of inflation, if the consumer price index is 2.5 or less, then it would be that. If it's over 2.5, then it would stay at 2.5. If the inflation is over 8.5% next year, then there would be no minimum wage increase, which is what happened at the county. The county had no minimum wage increase because their law currently is capped. So I would probably start now figuring out how to take out that second section about the rate of inflation, so that, you know, you just cap it at 2.5 per year, index to CPI. If it hits 2.5, fine, we'll just keep it at 2.5 a year. But the 8.5% inflation rate, or we could just create a ramp artificially for next year. But that will need to be addressed so that what happens at the county level doesn't happen to workers in the city of Chicago.
And what about healthcare workers and those earning tips? How does a new law affect them?
Well, domestic workers, we put them on the highest tier, $15 an hour. The mayor's mother was so domestic workers are, we've kind of escalated the issue of domestic workers. I don't see Rev CJ, but, you know, we worked really well. We created this coalition of kind of folks, doers, problem solvers in this protecting workers working group we had. And we just focused in on, for a while, we focused on policy issues related to the pandemic. The other issue was domestic workers. So we put domestic workers, if you're a domestic worker, if you're doing home and whatever that definition is, there's a list of things that include domestic work, then you are now receiving effective, I think that goes in effect August 1st,
Right.
$15 an hour.
Good.
That's big. That's big.
And
Now, and there's also some very significant changes to domestic workers and contracts, but that doesn't go in effect until January, which is going to take, it's kind of a sea change in that area, but we're real excited about it.
And those earning tips?
The tips are also tiered. They're at $8.40 for the 4 to 20 and $9 an hour for those 21 employees and up. That's an area where a lot of employers don't agree that if you don't make enough in tips to get the full minimum wage, that the employer has to supplement that. I mean, I got a call a few months ago from a person in an ice cream shop on the west side. He said, well, we have a tip jar and I'm not getting enough in tips to make the hourly wage. So I told, it's a gentleman who didn't sound like a real hustler for tips. So he wasn't making enough in tips because the little tip jar at the ice cream stand, and I can't imagine an 8-year-old is tipping the ice cream guy. So he wasn't making enough in tips. He wanted to know what he could do. What I told him to do is tell the employer, if not, call us and file a complaint and we'll help you get that full amount in tips, because you're supposed to make the full minimum wage with tips.
And by the way, to Morgan, kind of a little announcement here. I don't know if we have that little sheet to put up, but otherwise, if you want to know more about these things, because when I look on the website, again, Andy's office, they'll show, for example, you can look at it right now and you can see certain things like how many people complained about minimum wage, et cetera. So keep in mind, there's a wealth of information there. Before we leave minimum wage, I want to go back to Tom, who spent a lot of time fighting the fight for 15. Is there anything that we could shortly discuss there that why we've had so many rough battles that are hard for us? Why has the fight for 15 been so successful?
That's a very good question, David. I will tell you, I think it's the most significant thing my union has done in their 100-year history. This started out, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago with a handful of fast food workers in New York. and it was really the strength of the issue of income inequity, with an organized group behind it with some resources that were able to elevate that from the fast food work to the Fight for 15 campaign, which, as you said, we all know, has impacted millions of workers. It's the strength of the issue, first of all. I think that people started to realize that there's millions of workers, adults who go to work every day and can't get ahead. They're just working to try to survive. That economic system's not sustainable over time. And it's the strength of the issue. And we see what's happened. I mean, it's impacted millions of workers. From SEIU standpoint, that's who we organize. We organize some of the most essential, but also some of the most marginalized workers there are. We raise the bottom. We raise $15 to the minimum. That's how our members, the people we organize, can start to make 17, 18, 20. The value of labor is relative, and it's people have, David, when I was a little kid growing up in Gary, Indiana, my parents told me, you work hard and you can get ahead. And you know what? They were right. If you worked hard, you can get ahead. Today, millions of people work hard. They try to teach their children the most essential family value of a good work ethic, and they can't, because they can't get ahead. They can't, not only can they not barely survive, they can't create any upward mobility for their children. And, that's the strength of that issue. I mean, and it's 15 15's not adequate in this economy right now, but I'm glad that we're starting to move, and I was hoping nationally we would move to 15 as the floor. That will continue. Income inequity and a fight for equity will continue, I think, to be a very powerful issue that unions and community groups and worker centers will continue to agitate around. And hey, and now we get a situation where workers are saying, I'm not so quick to come back to work. So what we have to watch out for, and this is what I always had concern about, what the conditions we put around the minimum wage with inflation and unemployment, is that we don't want to get in a situation when workers can increase the value of their labor. We want to codify that. We don't want to keep going back and forth. We don't, right now at the airport, they can't get a worker to come for $18 an hour. But I tell you what, the city minimum says 15. They can't get them for 18. We're trying, we got a piece of legislation that I think we're going to be successful with to raise that. The airlines don't want it raised because they're hoping next year, maybe unemployment will be 10% and they can hire people at $14 or $12 or whatever. So, that's why it's important. All the good work that Andy's office is doing and the good work that the workers centers do and unions has to be focused in raising the value of people's labor and codifying it so that they don't keep going backwards.
Let me follow up a little different way with that with Andy. Part of this is, legislators can hopefully pass better laws, as Tom and others have done on minimum wage. But Andy, your job is trying to find ways for people that are getting screwed, whether it's wage theft or not the paid sick leave or 101 other things. Particularly now with the new minimum wage, how equipped are you to deal with the bad apples that try and cheat their workers? Kind of tell us what you do. We know what Tom might do. At least we can. Unions at least have some power. They can demand certain things, but again, it's hard for them to demand it where they don't have a union. So it's a big task for you in the city. And I know you don't have 150 people working for you. So how do you do what you're doing?
Well, this is one of the ways we do it. We get the word out by doing outreach. We don't have an education and outreach person. We probably should. I'm the education and outreach person. I do it in Spanish. I do it in English, and I'm just constantly banging wherever I can get our office to be on stage, we'll do it. But you have to reach workers where they're at, right? So we've tried to work really hard with Fight for 15. They're organizing fast food workers, and it's hard for them. This Fair Work Week ordinance is no joke. And the jurisdictional hoops that they have to figure out about, wait, does this restaurant qualifier? Do they have enough owners? There are a lot of, and workers don't really understand a complex ordinance. I mean, wage theft is easy. You look at a pay stub, or how much you get paid? Did I get the hourly wage? Bam. Paid sick leave, it's got some wrinkles. Like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to accrue. How much do I accrue? How much do I roll over? It's a little more to it, but people get when I'm sick, I should be able to take off. pretty good. But the Fair Work Week ordinance is very substantial in what it does for workers, and it's not reaching enough workers. And so we are trying to do a much better job, and we probably need to invest resources at how do we reach workers, and how do you do that? You partner with worker centers. To be honest, we probably need boots on the ground. I don't have enough time to knock on doors. I'm not knocking on doors doing that. Our work is complaint driven. So we need to partner with people in communities, labor organizations who can reach workers at the ground level. That's how I see it.
And by the way, on the Fair Work Week, which I think was passed last year, remind us all, this gives workers new power by, I think, is it guaranteeing that they actually can see a work schedule for, is it roughly 10 days out or something? Because a lot would allow them.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
Yeah, so the Fair Work Week ordinance is all about scheduling. You're supposed to get your schedule 10 days in advance so you can plan your life. If you're a single mom, you need to know, well, do I need daycare or not? So you work in a fast food restaurant, you've got 3 shifts. You're supposed to know I'm not working Saturday. If they change your shift less than 10 days, then you should get 1 hour of predictability pay, which is 1 hour of extra pay. However, restaurants are quick to figure out that there's an exception. You can mutually agree. This is this thing that they use, mutual agreement. And what they've done in certain fast food restaurants, they use an app that says, would you like to decline the shift? Or if you accept the shift, you have to do this mutual agreement. Click here. And workers don't know what they're clicking. They're just taking more hours. They don't realize by clicking a mutual agreement, they've basically waived their ability to get extra pay. So as you can tell, the ordinance is not quick. Law firms don't understand it. App developers don't get it. It's a very complex ordinance. It's going to take time. And we believe, I mean, there are 6 industries that it impacts: manufacturing, hotels, restaurants, retail, and healthcare. And there's another one. But in healthcare, think of those that are not in unions doing dialysis center work. It's a scheduling nightmare. So this is an ordinance where businesses are paying law firms to help them get around the ordinance. They're not paying them to comply with the ordinance. They're paying, what are the loopholes? And we've looked at some research from, there's a researcher here from the U of I who's done work in Seattle for about 2 years. Magnificent lady, I forget her name, sorry. But she basically says there are 3 kind of managers in fast food restaurants. Some, they really don't care about the law and they're trying to avoid it because they're worried about their bonuses. 2, they're trying to figure it out and they're doing their best, but it's complex. And 3, they just are not going to do it, period, no matter what you tell them. And meanwhile, this is all on the backs of workers who, I did an investigation in a fast food restaurant recently. I went to a couple locations and you can see them, like, once they figured out who I was, they were peeking over their masks and glasses, trying to, like, hey, I called you, man. You didn't call me back. So I'm very engaged in the investigation front. One is there's a lot of policy, but I take a personal approach to the biggest investigations. And I think the Fair Work Week ordinance is where we're hoping to get our biggest wins to date.
Okay, and so one of the action things out of tonight for our listeners, either live or on Facebook or whatever, is that this is really important. If you know people, if you work with people, the more you can spread the word, okay, and the more you learn about what this office can do, what a union can do, what the worker centers can do, that information could be helpful in building a stronger coalition to correct some of these things. Let me go back to you, Tom. Pat Lofthouse asks, what really does right to work mean? Okay, kind of a basic question. What is it?
Right to work came about where it gave states an option under the National Labor Relations Act to pass what they call right to work legislation, which means that you can't force people to be in the union. However, the way the law is written, they don't have to pay dues to the union. They can be outside the union, but they get all the benefits of the union contract. It'd be basically if you said, hey, I want to live in this country and I want to enjoy all the wonders that we have and what we provide societally, but I don't want to pay any taxes. That's basically what it would be.
Okay, and while I've got you there, Tom, Ray Sanders asks, what might be the top legislative initiative that you can think of, or one or two? He asks for three, but I'm shortening it, to make union organizing easier, you know.
Well, I think first of all, we have to understand that we have laws that were in labor laws that were put in place when our economy was much different. The airport is governed by the Railway Labor Act, which is 120 years old when it was only railroads. It's not relevant. The National Labor Relations Act was really passed as a basis, as a law that where we could organize the industrial sector. You know, we moved to the service sector, and I will tell you what, our SEIU Property Services nationally, in the last 30 years, we doubled our membership. Only private sector union did that, David, and we didn't have a single election under the National Labor Relations Act because it wasn't effective. We just used collective power to do it. There needs to be a real change, and we're not even talking about the gig economy, which is a whole new ball game. And quite frankly, 10 years from now, it'll even be much bigger than what it is now. You know, Andy started to get into some of the questions of how people are defined and as independent contractors, employees. It gets very complicated. So to answer the question, I'm sorry, I forgot the person's name who asked it.
Patricia Lofthouse.
Thank you. We need to have labor laws that recognize the economy in which we function in, that allow workers to use their collective strength to be able to impact their lives. And until we get that, we're going to continue to have a lot of the problems we have in terms of the growing inequities, not just in terms of wages, but in terms of health, access to health care, access to public housing or decent housing, access to education, all those things. There's huge parts of the workforce that are excluded from all that.
One little amendment, that question was also asked by Ray Sanders. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Ray.
Let's get a little more philosophical for a second. We've got some time left. I'm trying to figure out if we're at a good point right now. Are we at a kind of a breaking point? We've got, whether you like President Biden or not, there's money flowing to people that need it, whether it's unemployment, there's going to be infrastructure money, there's money flowing to the states and localities, which can be used for a lot of valuable resources that Republicans were against, but both Democrat and Republican urban people wanted it. There's the reaction to the pandemic, there's the minimum wage. Are we in a possibility of a significant step forward for working people?
Yeah, to me, David, I do think that depending on particularly the human infrastructure package, whether that gets passed, it'll have a huge impact on workers, particularly women workers, to be able to provide childcare, to be able to provide so women can come back into the workforce. That'll have a huge impact. And I think a lot of the things that the Biden administration is trying to do will have a huge impact. When I look at, are we at a turning point, David? I have to step back from the legislation as a trade unionist and say, where's the working class at? And when I look at that, things are pretty dire. The working class in this country is polarized, racially polarized. I don't think that class politics are articulated right now. And I think there's great dangers in that type of polarization. I mean, that we had Trump, and if you know we're on the edge. I believe we're on the edge of fascism here, and so that worries me in a bigger sense, David. And it's incumbent upon trade unionists and unions to unite workers, to bring workers to their common identity. It's not to say we don't fight those things that divide us. We're a social union. We fight against racism and sexism and those things that divide us. But I think in the bigger picture of things, that's what I'm a lot more worried about, because I just think the politics in the country are very polarized right now.
Yes, they are. And hopefully it's not too naive, but hoping to the extent that the federal government does more for working people in the ways we just mentioned, and they're somehow able to keep it up with this razor thin majority they have, I'm hoping on some of those same issues, right, that, people realize a lot of the Trump's promises were BS when it came to working people. And so maybe some of the racial crap and inequities can be kind of beaten down with little successes if we see more people going to work and more minimum wage successes. But
David, I hope you're right. But when I look how Trump politicized the mask wearing and vaccines, I mean, it's ridiculous. There's a lot of distorted consciousness out there among a lot of workers, unfortunately. But let's go back to what our topic is here.
Yes,
we have a question from the chat that I'd like to lift up for the group. So we shared this report from 2019 from the Office of Labor Standards earlier. We can see from it the kinds of complaints and the process of how those are handled. Is there a place that consumers can go to basically find out information about these companies so that consumers can make informed choices about where they're going to spend their money in supporting workers?
Interesting. Good question. Andy?
Well, we don't have a public-facing database of employers that have violated labor laws in Chicago yet. And I think what we've looked at is trying to create, Seattle has, not that I want to talk about Seattle too much, but Seattle just publicizes when things happen, investigation, paid sick leave, $422,000 went to the workers from a global corporation named X, 427 to the workers, 100 to the city, bam, and they report it, and then it becomes part of their quarterly report. I was told don't do it monthly, and you might not want to do it quarterly, but we need to create a space where we report what's happening and at least call out those that have done wrong. We do have an annual report, and I'm trying to release one kind of any day now. And this report, however, doesn't go into the nitty gritty, like the narrative of what we've done. So this is just 2020 is much more, there's a lot more volume in what we did in 2020. You look at like the paid sick leave cases went up to 585, but we closed 353 of them. That was like a misunderstanding of what social distancing or what COVID really was. People were complaining about paid sick leave, but it was really erroneously taken by 311 operators. It came in as a sick leave complaint. It was COVID related, but it turns out it was, we had to close a lot of those cases. What you will see over time is our volume has gone up, and I am like, a razor's edge away from releasing some really exciting news of 2 cases we've been working on for 3 to 6 months for workers, a huge amount of back pay for workers and some somewhat significant fines. I'm not as worried about the fines to the city as I am back pay to the workers. So big cases for workers that we're trying to release really soon. But I'm to the question, I think we do need to do a better job of calling out businesses that aren't serving workers well. But on the other hand, we don't want a neighborhood place that is important to jobs to get shut down by a cancel culture. Example, if we find a sick leave violation and it's gone back a year and they say, oh my God, we totally we screwed up. It's our fault, mea culpa. We're going to pay the workers. We'll pay our fine. And they put their house in order. We don't want that place to be put out of business because that's like a neighborhood store. So at the micro small business level, for those that comply and to come in and cure defects in the city, in the violations of labor laws, we want to keep them alive. But those that are egregious, we want to call them out, and we should be shutting them down, like that tank noodle investigation that happened, if you recall.
Yeah.
Well, Andy, I can give you a bigger example. And David, this goes to the question. I mean, Andy's office does great work, and you can see the results here there. But I will give you an example. This happened under a previous mayor. The largest cleaning contract that the city has is at O'Hare Airport. The largest. It was $100 million contract. United Maintenance 4 years ago settled a stolen wages suit, $950,000. $950,000. Largest contract that the city has. Now, it wasn't under this mayor, but that mayor should have made that an example and done something about that. As it turned out, that same employer, a couple of years later, a year and a half later, had another wage theft But this time they sealed the case, so we don't even know how much he had to pay. But those are things that the city can set a real strong example. When that happens, they have to go after these contractors. David, or Andy, I'm glad that you're going to have some big settlements, and I think it's really important they get publicized, both so employers can see them and say, this is what happens, but equally important, and maybe more important, that workers can see it and they can say, hey, there is a way that we can address things that are happening to us.
And that actually brings up a really good follow-up question that we got in the chat. What can the folks that are watching this do to help inform workers who might need these services? What do you suggest for the folks who want to get involved and help spread the word and do the education piece?
Well, for me, it's, we have kind of ongoing workshops on minimum wage updates, paid sick leave updates. But I think, you've got to get local. That's where I see, I'm from Pilsen. That's kind of where I got my start. I called up Casa Slan in the middle of the night one night and asked them if they needed a teacher. And the next thing you know, I was teaching for free, and I was teaching in a public school. And then I met some people, and I was, each job I landed kind of centered around my neighborhood work. And I miss that the most. So, I think you do have to get involved locally. And the worker centers are a great start. Government, we're not out like we were. So it's kind of hard to engage and find ways to touch people the way we used to touch people pre-pandemic.
By the way, one thing I wanted to do, unfortunately, I didn't get it done. I think it would have been really good for us to put out a sheet of the worker centers that are active in this area. We could still do that and just email it to people who are watching that.
David, that's a good idea. I was going to suggest to segue from what Andy was saying, volunteer for the Workers Center. If you don't have time, make a contribution, because the Workers Centers are on the edge of wage theft and immigrant workers and things like that. So
yeah, that's a great point. And back to the previous question, again, I do think it's helpful. We don't want to the activists asking that question know bringing pressure on bad apples is important. And I think we can make a distinction, as you mentioned, Andy, if somebody made a mistake and cleaned it up, fine, we're not going to go stop and shop in there. But we need to hear some of that big apples and make a little noise, and it'll make your job easier because it might help with compliance. So I think we should put that in the kind of the plan somehow. And I hope that whatever you're going to announce soon, Labor Day is coming up. That'd be a good time to announce some.
Oh, that's right.
Crack in action. Now we have just a little bit of time left. Let me ask this question. Many of you remember Joan Esposito, a good friend, and she's on Progressive Radio every day. She was asking me the other day, and I'll ask you, anything because of the pandemic or any changing circumstances, do we believe there's going to be some maybe changes in the to a 4-day work week in certain places? It's just
David, the pandemic, definitely we're going to see flexible schedules. I think, you'll see people working 2 at home, 3 in the office, or whatever. But I think more importantly, we're going to see things change because of what's happening with technology. And we're going to be 10 years from now, 1/3 of white males with a high school degree or less are drivers. They drive buses, they drive trucks, they drive cars, they drive vans, they drive. Where are those jobs going to be at in 10 years from now? What's going to happen? No doubt the pandemic escalated and sped up an awful lot of stuff. Even I figured out all the remoteness, David. So it lets you know that, but the overall automation and the way the economy is changing, going to the gig, it's going to have huge impact on jobs, on the ability to work. I hope the answer is that we have enough resources in the country, maybe not have enough jobs or 40-hour jobs. So David, I hope the question is that 10 years from now, we're at a point where the 30-hour week is the more common week instead of the 40, and let people spend time doing art or doing what they really want to do. So
it certainly make happier workers, right?
Yes, it would.
Finally, let me just say, because I might have missed some questions, but let me just ask both of you in terms of some closing comments. Let me just go back to you first, Andy. I know that it's a fairly new office. I can't remember. Are you the first director or the second?
The first.
The very first. Okay. All right. So a lot of,
First and only, let's hope ever.
a lot of pressure on you. Okay. What final words can you give us?
Well, I've worked at a lot of different jobs. This is the most fun I've ever had. I think I'm best with a story. I think a few of the organizers have figured out just show him the workers and he'll go our way. I'm very influenced by workers and worker stories. They just remind me of kind of my mom is Hispanic and the way she was treated and how they've kind of got to bite their teeth and, bear and, grin and bear it sometimes. And I'm very moved by worker stories. And I find that the work very satisfying. I am constantly trying to figure out what's next. And so I have a memo now of what I think is next. And I find that right now I worked in state government and I was never able to get big ideas through. Sorry, previous governors. But right now, when we have a good idea, it might not be now, but I feel like I've been able to dream something big or find something important and implement it. And that's very rewarding to see the impact. When we passed that hotel worker recall ordinance and they told me that the ladies all cried when it passed, I mean, it was an impossible ordinance when I first looked at it, but to know how it made an impact on their lives was huge for me. It was very rewarding. So I try to see the glass half full. I think there's some really exciting stuff, but I know that power is never given, and there are a lot of big fights to come.
Pardon me, but one follow-up, because you mentioned that and I want to ask earlier. Just tell us a little bit more about this very important ordinance that was passed recently. This basically helps hotel workers who were laid off by the pandemic. Tell us what it does.
Correct. So as the hotel shut down, the Palmer House, Hilton, they laid off employees that had been there 10, 20, 30 years. And so the workers were very concerned that as hotels are opening up, and they are, they weren't going to get recalled. So it created a priority system for recalling workers. And the deal was cut between the Hotel and Lodging Association and the union. So here we just sat back and can you do this? Can you do that? I had a million concerns, but they were able to work out an ordinance that works for workers. I don't think either side is completely happy, but I know the workers feel like they've got a path to getting their jobs back if the hotel opens up. So it's a really exciting ordinance.
Good. And I think, help me out, it's that great Unite One labor leader, Kate, what's the last?
Karen Kent.
Karen Kent. And she
there's a lot of credit.
She closed it, man. Let me tell you, I've seen speakers and I've been at meetings, but when she went to kind of salute what they had done, it was a real tearjerker. It was a very important moment for that union and for her. And I think she represented her people really well in doing that.
Good. A shout out for her. Okay, Tom, let's.
Well, let me first.
As the old wise labor leader, let you close it out. Okay.
Let me compliment Andy for that good work on the hotel workers bill. I mean, their contract provides for recall up to a year, and the pandemic kept people out. These are workers who made a career of working at hotels because they get decent pay and decent benefits, just like janitors who work there forever because they get decent pay. And my closing remarks are what we all know, that if you get up and go to work every day, and you should be able to make a living wage. You should be able to put food on your table, put a roof over your head, and create opportunities for your kids. There's millions of workers that's the furthest thing from what they're able to accomplish. We need to reward work. We need to understand that what worked in this country when really there was great upward mobility for millions of workers was when unionization was much higher. It's on the government to come up with laws, and it's on the labor movement to come up with the resources and the efforts to do it. And if we don't do those things, Andy, you're going to get a lot more work because these issues are real. And we're going to try to, instead of letting workers use their collective strength, which we always know is the most powerful force to change things, we're going to be doing a lot of things where we try to legislate. And I don't think in the long run, that's the right way to do it. So That's
Okay,
my closing remarks, David. I
I think
appreciate you
that's
inviting
great.
me.
I'm just going to emphasize the positive at the moment, and that is people like you that fought for 15 and the work that Andy's doing, and the fact that Chicago now has a $15 minimum wage. That's going to help millions of people nationally. It's going to help a lot of people. We estimate 400,000 here in Chicago. We need more of that. And we thank Tom Balanoff, Andy Fox. Keep it up. We appreciate your good work. And I don't know whether Morgan has any closing remarks, sir?
I will just close it out by saying once again, thank you to Andy Fox and Tom Balanoff, and to everyone who joined us tonight on this beautiful July evening to talk about this important issue. Again, David Orr, thank you so much for moderating another great event. And to everyone else, events like these are only possible when we have support. So if you enjoy our virtual town halls, and hopefully we'll be in person again soon, please go to goodgovernmentillinois.com and chip in so that we can keep doing these programs. And a recording of this event, as well as all of our other events in the past, are on our Facebook page, as well as on our website at goodgovernmentillinois.com. So you can share with your friends and anyone else who may have missed the event that may be interested in this topic. Again, thank you, everyone, and we will see you next time.
Get vaccinated, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom and Andy.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care, Andy.
Bye-bye.
See you, Tom. Thank you.